Hi guys, I have been working on this head from my 1981 Kawasaki KZ750E2. Um, it was not running really well at all, and then it stopped running altogether, and then it started backfiring every time I tried to start it up. So then eventually I got around to checking compression, and one of the pistons did not have any compression at all, and that's due to this valve, which you can see is really messed up, completely burnt out. That's what a burnt valve looks like. You can also tell by the top. You can see there's a little lip there. Actually, there's a big lip on this one. The That's the center left valve, and then this is the center right valve, which I'm also replacing. A little bit of a lip on it as well, so I decided to replace that. Just wanted to show you guys what it looks like in here, and so here we have the exhaust valve cam. You can tell that because it has the gear for the tachometer here, which actually leaks like a sieve, so I need to get a new valve or a new gasket for that as well. Root problem for that burnt up valve is the shim spacing hadn't been done in far too long. Didn't even know it existed, but tore it apart anyways. Found these and realized that there's probably no gap, and so the valve was staying open, even though the lobes were all the way up, and so exhaust was leaking past and heating up the edges of those valves and started burning them up. It's kind of in a nice stage right here to show you guys what the internals look like. So there's the cam for the exhaust, and then over here you can see that we have the tappet buckets. These should move freely within there, and you should be able to get them in and out easily, which those two front ones were tight, and so I'm going to replace those as well. And then you can see underneath there, this is the spring retainer, and inside the spring retainer you have these little conical holders that they slip down in like that in there, and kind of wedge themselves in there. You need a valve removal tool to get those out. I got the first one out with a socket just in a hammer, which is not the right way to do it. And to get them back together, you have to have that tool, or a very large C clamp would probably work, but it was worth the $22 off of Amazon or whatever I spent on it. So yeah, I'm putting in two new valves here. I put in new valve seals. You can kind of see that little blue thing in there. The old ones were just basically crumbling. Trying to get them out with a pair of pliers and just tore them apart. I expected to replace them anyways, so I wasn't very delicate, but yeah. So something else I did is I got some grinding metal compound. This stuff's great. You can just put it around the edge of the valve, put your valve in, and then hook up an electric drill, and it'll reseat your valves nicely, so you know you'll have good seal. While I was doing the valve shim replacement, I used a feeler gauge underneath all of these, making sure there's a space, which none of these exhaust valves had any space at all underneath them, at least that I could feel with a 1,000th inch feeler gauge. Only two of the intake valves had any space underneath them. So I assumed zero because for the other two, because the tappet buckets were still moving. I can still rotate them, but for the front ones, I assumed that it was not zero because the tappet buckets weren't able to be moved with my finger, and also because I burned up that valve, so I actually moved the shims from the intake side, which were far smaller than the exhaust side. I moved them to the exhaust side, so then I would have a significant gap to be able to be measured, and then did the math to see what clearance I needed, which this can range from 0.08 millimeters to 0.18 millimeters valve gap. These little valve shims actually fit underneath these tappet buckets, kind of. You kind of see a little spot for them. They kind of stick to them. And they also go in, they kind of sit in here like that. So it's good to put them in like that. That way, you know, they're lined up when you're putting the tappet buckets in. I actually had to put one of the tappet buckets in, and on that exhaust valve, that center left one that burned up, and it was so messed up that I had to put it in the freezer to get it in. And that's kind of the point I decided that needed to be replaced. The other thing to note, you can see on the top of these, they're numbered 1, 2, 3, etc., and they have an arrow facing forward. This is actually the front of the bike, because this is the exhaust side. So that's really helpful. That way you know that those go in the same place. And then here you also have 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's nice. And then one thing also, you can use this gear here, which actually you can see this one has a big old chunk missing out of it. But you can use this to make sure that this cam is the right direction. And then you also notice that this gear is bolted on from one side. So then you can assume that this is the proper installation because of this worm drive here. And you can actually use that to make sure that this one goes in right. So it'd actually be oriented as such to line up with that one. So that's cool. I've got this lined up for the if I turn the head around. Another thing to note, the valve springs, this is the inner one. There's also the outer one. But on both of them, you'll notice that on the bottom, you have tighter coils here than the top here. So that's going to be the top where the looser coils are. So that's something important to note while you're putting these back together. And always lay out all your stuff, or else you'll get it really confused. It's hard to tell valves apart unless they're burnt up like mine are. But yeah, the inside's the 1981 Kawasaki KZ750. Bike's been ridden pretty hard. Had a lot of fun with it. But hopefully I'll get it back together. I'm also putting in a new head gasket, honing the cylinder. This is the cylinder mid. This is the chain tensioner here. But I actually got some gravel in the crankcase, so I'm gonna have to try and flush that out somehow. But that's kind of the next step once I get all my parts in and parts installed. Also getting the gasket that goes underneath here scraped off the crankcase. It's really stuck on there, so that's gonna be a little bit of a project. But other than that, I've got all my shim spacing proper. I've actually got, excuse my notebook, but I've actually got the math I did to figure out what valve shims I needed. So you can pause it here if you want to take a look at it. I didn't really put the math in there. I did it on my phone, but you can kind of see how I laid it out. So here I'm measuring the original gap, which I didn't put that here because I have it on the previous page, so that's kind of not that helpful, but it was 0.003, 0.004, and then 0 and 0. So only that one, sorry, that's in inches, thousandths of inches. So when you convert that to millimeters, that's just barely within the 0.08 millimeter range. So that was the only one that worked. So I'm getting all new shims. I'm making it so there's a pretty good gap, so I don't have to do this again very soon. But you can see I actually so it was for the exhaust valve anyway. So this is the shim that was in here was a 2.85, but then I was like, oh, that's not going to work because there's no gap. So I put in the 2.4 from the intake side. So I could get a reading of 0.406, and then did some math to figure out that I need a 2.65 on that exhaust, the exhaust left outside. Just did that for all of these. Yeah, good stuff to know how to do. I'm going to definitely do it more often, or at least check it, because that really fucked up that, yeah. I was pretty upset. Bike's been apart for it's been over a year now, so things are pretty dirty. I'm going to have a lot of work ahead of me. Been lazy about it, but yeah, thought I'd give you guys a little bit of information on the Kawasaki KZ750E2 from 81. It's got 4 carburetors, so I've got to deal with that too, but I think they're doing all right and need to figure that out. All right, thanks. Bye.